I've been a night security guard on this old cargo ship for years. I'm not even sure how I ended up with the job. Guess it just felt right for someone like me. Late 50s, a little worn out, but still functional. A quiet robot, really, just going through the motions. My shift is from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. And let me tell you, nothing ever really happens on a ship that's been docked for years. The ship is ancient, to say the least. It creaks with every wave, groaning like it has a soul and it's trying to speak to you. If you've ever been on an old ship at night, you know the sounds, the sudden slamming of metal, the thudding of heavy waves against the hull. But those were just the normal noises. Just the ship doing what it does. Right? Or so I thought. I'd gotten used to the noises. The shifting of cargo, the wind scraping against the deck, and the waves that seemed to relentlessly slam into the side. Sometimes, it sounded like something was running around on the deck. Kids, probably. We had some maintenance crews on board, and they'd often bring their kids along. They'd run and play while their parents worked. I never thought much about it. But I couldn't shake this one thought every time I heard those footsteps in the dead of night: are they still here? It happened often, though, at first, I shrugged it off. I'd step outside, look around with my flashlight, and always find nothing. The ship would be silent again, except for the distant crash of the waves. But that one night, it was different. I was already getting ready to turn in. I just set my coffee mug down on the small, scratched-up table in my quarters. The ship was so quiet now, like it was waiting for something. Then, out of nowhere, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of feet running, fast, right outside my door. My heart skipped a beat. I grabbed my flashlight, not even thinking about it, and shot out of the room like a reflex. My mind raced. Could someone be sneaking around? I called out, "Is anyone there?" The silence swallowed my voice. The only thing I heard was the waves relentlessly slamming against the deck. I stood there for a moment, trying to listen for anything, any sound, any hint that something wasn't right. Nothing. Just the echo of the ocean, the hiss of the wind. But then, I heard it. A child's laughter. Soft at first. High-pitched. Innocent. But in that moment, it didn't sound right. Something felt off. I rushed in the direction of the sound, my pulse thundering in my ears, but the further I went, the more it seemed to vanish into thin air. The corridor stretched out before me, dark and narrow. The ship was so vast, its interior so labyrinthine. I turned a corner, half expecting to see something, but there was nothing. Not even a shadow. "Hello?" I called again, my voice shaking now. "You can't be here. Go back to your parents." Nothing. Not even an answer. Just the silence, stretching on and on. I decided to check the engine room. Maybe the kids had wandered down there, poking around where they shouldn't be. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the musty air hitting me like a wall. And then, I saw them. Scattered across the floor were a handful of children's pencils, colorful and sharp. Bright reds, yellows, greens, like a vibrant rainbow thrown carelessly around the engine room. The lights were still on. I froze. How could anyone be down here? The ship was empty, just me, and the silence of the night. I stood there for a few seconds, holding my breath. It wasn't like the kids to wander down here, not this late, and certainly not in this part of the ship. I bent down, picking up one of the pencils, feeling its smooth surface in my hand. My thoughts raced. I'm not one for overreacting. I'm a man of routine. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something was off. I walked down the hallway, calling out, "Hey! I'm serious. I'm calling your parents. I'm calling the police." My voice sounded stronger than I felt, but inside, I was starting to panic a little. Still, I pressed on. Something inside me told me to find these kids, to get them off this ship. Then, I heard the laughter again. A quick, sharp sound, echoing off the walls. It came from deeper in the ship, from somewhere far ahead. At that point, I knew. I had to keep going. I followed the sound. The ship felt different that night. It wasn't just the quiet, though that was unusual enough. It was as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. The wooden panels creaked beneath my boots, the floor slick with the moisture of the sea air. There was a faint smell of oil mixed with salt, an odd but familiar scent that I'd grown used to over the years. But tonight, the smell seemed heavier. Almost suffocating. As I walked through the dim corridors, the long shadows from my flashlight seemed to stretch unnaturally, twisting into shapes that didn't quite make sense. The ship's interior was a maze of narrow, barely lit hallways, metal doors, and old machinery that hummed softly in the background. Each step I took made the walls groan like they were alive, as if the ship was reacting to my presence. The laughter came again, a little louder this time. A soft giggle, like something was playing a game. But it wasn't playful anymore. It was cold. Empty. It sent a shiver down my spine. I tightened my grip on the flashlight. The beam of light flickered for a split second, but I wasn't sure if it was just my nerves or something more. The beam caught the edges of old rusted pipes, flickering lights in the ceiling, and the occasional steel door that seemed out of place. I followed the sound, my steps quickening, and my mind racing with questions. Who would be here at this hour? What were they doing? The ship was abandoned, except for me. My breath came a little quicker, but I tried to calm myself. I had to keep going. Had to find whoever, or whatever, was making these noises. As I rounded another corner, my flashlight landed on the mess of scattered pencils I had seen earlier. But this time, they weren't alone. There was something else, something that froze my blood in my veins. A drawing. The paper was crumpled, but I could make out enough to know it was a child's drawing. It was hastily sketched, with thick, uneven strokes of black, red, and green. It showed a ship, but not the one I knew. This ship was sinking, the water engulfing it. In the middle of the drawing, there was a figure. A little girl, with big, empty eyes and a twisted smile. I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me as I stared at it. My heart started pounding, each beat like a drum in my chest. Why was it here? Why was it drawn like that? The drawing seemed almost too vivid, too real, like it had been done just moments ago. I took a step back, my legs suddenly weak. That's when I heard it again. A soft whisper. Help me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It came from behind me, but when I turned around, there was nothing there. No child, no figure in the shadows. Just the long, stretching corridors of the ship, stretching out like they would never end. I had to go. I needed to get out of there. My mind raced, telling me to run. But as I turned to leave, I heard it, footsteps, running. Fast. Right behind me. I whipped around, but again, nothing. Nothing but empty, silent air. The steps had stopped. That's when I felt it, a presence, cold and heavy, like someone was watching me. My stomach twisted, my skin prickling with goosebumps. I raised the flashlight higher, trying to pierce the shadows, but the beam just flickered again, briefly illuminating the empty hallway before dimming. Who's there? I called out, my voice shaky. This isn't funny. You need to leave the ship. I didn't expect an answer. But I thought, just maybe, this time there'd be nothing. No laughter. No strange sounds. Just silence. But no. That damn laughter came again. But it wasn't sweet or innocent. It was dark, twisted, and full of malice. The kind of laugh you hear in nightmares. It sounded like it was all around me, coming from the walls themselves, seeping into my ears. I dropped the flashlight, feeling my chest tighten as the room seemed to close in on me. The ship felt alive, alive in a way that made my skin crawl. I couldn't breathe. My heart was hammering in my throat. My legs wouldn't move. And then I heard the sound of a door creaking open, slowly, like something was waiting just beyond it. I wasn't sure if I wanted to investigate or run. But I did both. I forced my feet to move, my body aching from the effort, and I sprinted towards the sound of the door, my heart pounding louder with each step. When I got there, I froze. The door was wide open. I hadn't seen it before. It led into one of the smaller cabins. My eyes went straight to the corner of the room, and there, on the floor, were more pencils. More drawings, scattered like they had been abandoned mid-play. The walls were covered in them, childish, innocent drawings of ships, people, and strange figures. And in the middle of it all, there was something new, a note, scribbled hastily in dark ink. "Why didn't you want to play with me?" My heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. I stepped forward, reaching out to grab the paper, but before I could touch it, I heard something else. A giggle. Soft. Playful. But there was nothing sweet about it anymore. I turned around, expecting to see a child standing there, but instead, I saw her. A silhouette in the doorway. A small figure, just standing there, watching me. Her eyes, they were dark, like two bottomless pits, and her face was twisted into a grin that made my blood run cold. Before I could react, she bolted. Ran off down the hallway, her footsteps echoing, the sound growing fainter as she disappeared into the darkness. But I couldn't stop myself. I ran after her. I don't know what I was thinking when I ran after her. Maybe it was instinct, maybe I thought I could catch up with her and put an end to whatever was happening on this damn ship. But as I bolted down the hallway, I felt like I was running into the abyss. The ship's layout seemed to stretch endlessly, corridors twisting into one another like a maze. Every turn, every corner I rounded, the darkness seemed to get thicker. The low hum of the engines echoed through the walls, reverberating like the heartbeat of some ancient creature. My flashlight was useless now, flickering, sputtering, barely lighting up the way ahead of me. I cursed under my breath, gripping it tighter, trying to steady my shaking hands. And still, her laughter echoed in my ears. It wasn't the innocent giggle of a child anymore. It had grown darker, twisted. Almost mocking, as if she knew I was chasing her, toying with me. I was panting now, my breaths ragged, my legs burning from the sprint. My mind screamed at me to stop, to turn around and get out of this nightmare. But my feet kept moving forward, down hallways that all looked the same, past doors that all looked locked, past windows covered in grime and saltwater stains. Then, I saw her again. Just ahead, standing at the end of a long corridor, bathed in the dim light of the emergency exit signs. I froze. She wasn't running anymore. She was standing still, facing me, her tiny form barely visible in the darkness. The only thing I could make out was the outline of her hair, long and wild, the silhouette of a dress swirling around her legs. Her head tilted slightly, as if she was studying me, waiting for me to catch up. I didn't move at first. It felt like she was watching me, waiting to see what I would do next. There was something in those empty eyes, something dark, that I couldn't look away from. Finally, I mustered the courage to take a step forward. "Hey," I said, my voice hoarse, barely a whisper. "What do you want from me?" She didn't respond. She just stood there, as still as the ship itself. Then, her lips parted. "I want to play with you," she said, her voice soft, sweet, and yet so wrong. My heart slammed against my chest. I didn't want to hear this. I didn't want to be here. I wanted to leave. But my legs refused to stop. I kept walking towards her, each step a battle, my chest tightening with every inch I moved. I don't know how much time passed. It felt like hours, but I was so consumed by the moment, by the terror that was consuming me, that I lost track of everything. But when I finally reached her, she didn't move. She didn't even flinch as I extended my hand to her. But that's when the air seemed to change. I felt a shift, like the temperature dropped 10 degrees. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I could feel something watching me, something behind me. Before I could turn around, a heavy slam echoed from the other end of the hallway. The sound was so loud, so violent, that it rattled my bones. The lights overhead flickered and went out completely, leaving me in absolute darkness. My heart jumped into my throat, and my pulse raced as I swung the flashlight around, but it was useless. I couldn't see anything. The ship seemed to groan beneath me, the walls closing in. I felt trapped. Alone. I didn't know what was worse, the darkness or the feeling that something was coming for me, something big, something I couldn't see. I spun around, but she was gone. In her place, there was a shadow. A tall, dark shape. It loomed in the doorway at the far end of the hall, a black mass that seemed to pulse with malice. I didn't know what it was. I didn't care. I just knew it was coming for me. My mind screamed for me to run, but my body was paralyzed with fear. The shape moved closer, and then I heard the footsteps. Heavy. Slow. Thudding against the steel floor, getting louder, closer, faster. It was like a drumbeat, the sound vibrating through the ship, shaking me to my core. I spun around and bolted. But I didn't make it far. My foot caught on something, a pile of debris, maybe, sending me sprawling across the floor. I scrambled to get up, but before I could, I heard the laughter again, louder this time. It wasn't just from one place, it was everywhere, echoing off the walls, surrounding me. The light flickered back on. I stumbled to my feet, my legs unsteady, and when the light finally steadied, I saw something that made my blood freeze. The walls were covered in drawings. Hundreds of them. Every inch of the corridor was covered, and the drawings, they weren't like the ones I had seen earlier. These were different. Distorted. Twisted. Faces, arms, legs, all out of proportion, all drawn in frenzied strokes, like someone had lost their mind while creating them. And in the middle of it all, the girl was there. She wasn't just a silhouette anymore. She was standing in front of me, her face twisted into that same empty grin, her eyes black and hollow. She stepped forward, and I could see her more clearly now. Her hair was tangled, wild, her dress torn in places. But it was her eyes, those dark, bottomless eyes, that held me in place. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. "Why didn't you want to play with me?" she whispered again, her voice sharp and cold, like ice. Before I could respond, the lights went out again. Complete darkness. The footsteps started again, closer this time. Heavy. Almost like boots. But they weren't the girl's footsteps. No. Something else was coming. The darkness pressed in on me like a living thing, suffocating the air, strangling the light. My pulse was thunder in my ears as I stumbled backward, my chest tight, the taste of fear sharp on my tongue. Every breath felt shallow, every movement slower than it should have been. I couldn't see, couldn't make sense of anything in the blackness, but I could feel it. Feel something close. Something wrong. I swear I could hear my own heartbeat thudding through my veins, louder than the echo of my own breath. And then the laughter came again, soft, gentle at first, as if the girl was standing right beside me, whispering in my ear. But the laughter had changed again. It wasn't sweet. It was a deep, low chuckle, like something evil was rolling around in her throat, something that didn't belong in the body of a child. The air turned cold. Not the cold that comes with an evening breeze, but the kind of cold that settles in your bones and makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. The temperature dropped so quickly I could feel it in my lungs as I tried to suck in air. My breath came out in short, ragged gasps, and the fog of it was the only thing I could see in the pitch black. I heard the scraping again. Slow. Relentless. Like something dragging across the steel floor. It was moving in circles, coming closer to me. The hair on my arms stood up, my hands trembled around the flashlight I clutched like a lifeline. I didn't dare to shine it in the direction of the sound, I was too terrified to see what was making it. I knew. I knew it wasn't her. It wasn't the little girl. It was something worse. The thudding of the footsteps grew louder. My heart skipped a beat, and in that split second of silence, I heard something that chilled me to my core. The sound of breathing. Heavy. Ragged. And it wasn't mine. I forced my body to move, my feet stumbling forward. There was no plan, no destination. I just had to get away from whatever was coming for me. The floor was uneven, metal grating beneath my shoes. I could hear my breath in my ears now, every inhale sharp and panicked. The sound of the breathing grew closer, louder. My body screamed at me to stop, but I couldn't. I wouldn't. Not again. Then, there it was. A rush of cold air, ice cold, too wrong, and a figure loomed in front of me. I froze, my mind screaming to move, to run, but I couldn't. I couldn't even think. It was the girl again. Or at least, that's what I thought at first. But the more I looked, the more wrong it felt. Her shape wasn't just wrong, it was twisted. The outline of her body flickered, like a mirage, her limbs stretching in unnatural ways. Her face was still that twisted grin, but now it was all teeth. Rows and rows of jagged, blackened teeth, a mouth too wide, opening too far. Her eyes were no longer empty. They were full. Full of something black, something that stared at me with a hunger that made my stomach churn, a cold, alien hunger that wanted something from me. It wanted me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. I wanted to scream, but the scream caught in my throat. The air around me thickened, as if it was closing in, compressing, pushing in on me from every side. I could feel the weight of it on my chest, in my throat, and then I realized, the footsteps, the breathing, the feeling of being followed, it was getting closer. It wasn't just her anymore. It wasn't just the girl. Something was in the dark with me. Something much bigger. Something far more terrifying. The ship groaned, its metal framework creaking with age, as if the entire vessel was alive, like it was breathing, like it was part of whatever was moving through the shadows. And then it hit me, the footsteps weren't human. They couldn't be. They were too heavy, too slow, each thud vibrating the walls, like something massive was following me. A shadow flickered to my right. A shape. The size of it, it was so large, it didn't seem possible for it to fit in the ship. I didn't turn to look. I couldn't. The weight of it was enough to keep me rooted to the spot. Every instinct in me told me to run, but my body refused to obey. The laughing stopped. Dead silence. And then, a scream. It wasn't the girl anymore. It was the thing. The thing behind me. I couldn't stop myself. I bolted. I ran. The air behind me seemed to press against me, like something was reaching out to grab me, dragging me back. The corridor stretched before me like a never-ending tunnel. I turned a corner, then another, my legs burning, my chest tight, but the footsteps kept getting louder. Closer. Then, I saw it. A door at the end of the hall. The exit. The way out. I didn't care what was behind me anymore. I didn't care what the ship was hiding. I had to get out. I reached for the door, my hand fumbling for the handle. I felt the cold metal beneath my fingers, but as soon as I turned the handle, it wouldn't budge. It was locked. No. No, no, no. I slammed my shoulder against it, my whole body weight pushing against the door, but it wouldn't open. And that's when I heard it again, the breathing. Closer this time. Right behind me. So close I could feel the heat of it on the back of my neck, like the breath of something alive. And then, in a voice that wasn't the girl's, but something far darker, far more malicious, I heard it say, "You can't leave." The words hit me like a physical blow. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break through the door, run, anything, but I was paralyzed. I couldn't even turn around. I was stuck. I slammed my fists against the door, desperate to get out, desperate to escape whatever it was that had been hunting me through this damned ship. And then, as if the ship itself was responding to me, the lights flickered back on, bright, blinding, and I saw it. The shadow. The thing. It was standing right behind me, the light was blinding, but it didn't matter. I was frozen, locked in place, my body betraying me. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, and I couldn't breathe. There was no escape. No way out. And then I saw it. The shadow loomed over me, impossibly tall, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. It was no longer just a silhouette, but something solid, something real. Something monstrous. It was as though the darkness had taken shape, a living, breathing thing, a mass of shifting shadows that seemed to devour the light around it. The longer I stared at it, the more it seemed to move, like it was pulsating with life. Its outline wasn't defined. It was like a void, a hole in the world, with jagged edges that twisted and contorted in unnatural ways. The edges of it blurred, like smoke in the air, swirling and twisting, constantly shifting. My breath caught in my throat. It was so close now I could feel the cold radiating from it. Cold so deep, so unnatural, it seemed to seep into my bones. I could feel its presence, a weight in the air that pressed down on me, crushing the space between us. It was no longer just a thing in the darkness. It was alive, moving, breathing in time with the thudding of my heart. And then I heard it. The sound that made everything inside me scream. It was a voice, low, guttural, and full of malice. A voice that didn't belong in a human body. It came from the thing behind me, echoing in my skull, sending a chill so deep I thought I might pass out. "You shouldn't have come back." I didn't want to turn around. I couldn't. Every fiber of my being told me to run, but my legs refused to move. It felt like the world had stopped, like time itself had stretched into an eternity, and in that moment, I was the only thing that existed, trapped in that hallway with the thing that had no face, no body. Just darkness. The shadow shifted again, the air around me growing heavier with each movement. I could feel the cold tightening around my chest, squeezing the life out of me. I couldn't even scream anymore. I couldn't do anything except stand there, paralyzed, unable to escape. And then, I heard it. A soft, whispering giggle. It was the girl. Her voice was sweet at first, like a child playing in the distance, but it quickly twisted into something darker. The laughter grew louder, harsher, until it became a cackling, maniacal sound that echoed through my skull. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. The ship groaned under the pressure, the metal bending and creaking as if the whole vessel was alive, struggling, breathing. And then, without warning, the shadow lunged. The force of it was too much. I didn't see it coming. The thing was so fast, so vicious. It reached out with what felt like countless hands, fingers of darkness that tore through the air. I tried to back away, but I couldn't move fast enough. Its grip was like ice, cold and sharp, and before I knew it, it had me. Its touch felt like death. Like every ounce of life was being drained from my body in an instant. My legs buckled beneath me, and I crashed to the floor. The cold spread through me like poison, numbing my limbs, freezing the blood in my veins. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and ragged, but it was drowned out by the laughter that was now joined by a chorus of voices. The girl. But also others. Voices that weren't hers. Something else. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come. All I could hear was the sound of laughter, cold and hollow, filling the hallway. I couldn't escape it. It was everywhere, surrounding me, echoing off the walls, through the corridors, bouncing in every direction. I had to get out. I had to get away from the thing, from the shadow that was suffocating me, from the girl who was laughing as if she had won. I managed to push myself to my knees, my body shaking violently from the cold that gripped me. My vision was blurry, my head spinning, but I couldn't give up. I couldn't stay here. I crawled toward the door again. It was still locked, still refusing to open. "Let me out!" I screamed, my voice cracking with desperation, but the thing didn't respond. The shadow loomed behind me, a dark presence that was slowly suffocating me, wrapping itself around my very soul. The laughter stopped, and everything was silent. An eerie, deathly silence that seemed to stretch out in all directions. I felt it again, that feeling of being watched. Something was waiting for me to do something, anything, to make a move. I couldn't stay here. I wouldn't. With every ounce of strength I had left, I pushed myself to my feet. I didn't look behind me. I couldn't. I just kept moving forward, pushing through the pain, through the overwhelming terror. The thing, whatever it was, wasn't finished with me yet. I could feel it closing in, but I didn't care anymore. I didn't care what it was. I just needed to escape. The hallway stretched on forever, and I could hear the sound of those footsteps again, chasing me. The laughter was back, growing louder, closer. It wasn't just the girl anymore, it was something else. Something worse. Something much worse. The shadows seemed to chase me, closing in around me like the walls of a coffin. I could feel the cold on my back, the weight of the thing pressing closer, almost suffocating me as I stumbled forward. My legs gave out beneath me, but I didn't stop. I crawled, pushing myself through the darkness, through the suffocating air. And then, as I rounded a corner, I saw the faint light of the deck ahead. The exit. I wasn't too far now. I could make it. But then, I heard it. A voice, clearer this time. A whisper, but it wasn't the girl's. It was different. "You shouldn't have left." I didn't look back. I couldn't. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to run. But my legs felt like they were made of lead, my steps heavy and uncoordinated, as though the ship itself was trying to keep me from escaping. The voice behind me echoed in my head, sending shivers down my spine. I could hear the deep rumbling of it, vibrating through the very walls of the ship. "You shouldn't have left." The whisper sounded so close, too close. It was as if it were coming from within me. A low, taunting hum, the voice of something ancient and cruel, something that was alive in the dark corners of the ship. The walls seemed to bend with its power, vibrating under the weight of its presence. I stumbled forward, my heart hammering in my chest, my breath shallow. The flashlight in my hand flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced across the walls, making the hallways twist and distort, as if the very ship were alive. "Please, please let me get out of here." The light was weak now, the battery almost gone, but I didn't dare stop to change it. If I did, I feared the darkness would consume me entirely. And then, I heard it again. The laugh. It started as a faint giggle in the distance, soft and eerie, and then it quickly grew louder. More distorted. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere. From the walls. From the air. From the very ship itself. I broke into a full sprint, my heart pounding so hard I could feel the blood rushing in my ears. My legs were burning, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but the laughter only seemed to speed up, keeping pace with me, gaining on me like some horrific shadow that refused to leave. Then came the footsteps. Heavy. Loud. Relentless. I glanced over my shoulder, and for a split second, I saw something. A figure, black and monstrous, rushing toward me down the corridor. The thing, the shadow, was closing in. It wasn't just following me anymore. It was hunting me. I turned back, my chest tightening with panic. I had to keep going. There was no other choice. I had to reach the deck. I had to get out. I finally rounded the last corner, and the door to the deck was ahead of me. The light from outside was faint, but I could see it. The fresh air, the open sky. I was so close I could almost taste it. But just as I reached the door, the ship groaned. A deafening, guttural sound that vibrated through the very bones of the ship, sending a shiver of terror through me. The door, my escape, slammed shut with a violent crash, and I was thrown back by the impact. My body slammed against the cold metal wall of the corridor, and I fell to the ground with a sickening thud. The laughter stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a low growl, deep and menacing, filled the space around me. I scrambled to my feet, panic surging through me, but the hallway stretched on in front of me, endless, suffocating. The ship felt like it was alive, its walls pressing in on me, and I was nothing but a trapped rat in its maze. I could feel the darkness closing in again, the weight of it on my chest, suffocating me. The laughter was gone, but in its place, the growl grew louder. Closer. I had to find another way out. I had to escape. I turned back, desperate, and saw something that made my blood run cold. The hallway wasn't empty anymore. The girl stood at the end of the corridor, her face twisted into a grotesque grin, eyes wide and black, as though the very darkness of the ship had swallowed her soul. She tilted her head, and then she spoke in that same voice, soft, childlike, but dripping with something sinister. "You didn't want to play with me." Her words echoed in the silence, each syllable like a cold knife, cutting through the air, filling the space with an overwhelming sense of dread. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My body felt frozen in place, as if the ship had wrapped its hands around me, holding me still for whatever horrors were about to come. Then, the sound of footsteps. Not the girls. These were heavier, slower. They were the sound of something big. Something monstrous. I turned. The shadow was there again, at the other end of the hallway. The shape seemed to pulse and flicker in and out of existence, its outline too large, too wrong to comprehend. It wasn't a man. It wasn't anything human. It was something beyond that, something made of darkness and fear. The ship groaned again, louder this time, as though it were trying to warn me. The metal walls around me shook, and I could hear the sound of something, dragging, scraping, dragging through the halls behind me. The sound was faint at first, but then it grew louder, closer. It was coming for me. I bolted again, turning and running as fast as I could, the darkness threatening to swallow me whole. I heard the scrape again, closer. The footsteps behind me quickened, and the growl from the thing echoed in the hallway. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a presence. A weight. A force that filled the air, pressing down on me, making it harder to breathe with every step I took. And then, something in the distance flickered. The lights. They flickered on. For the briefest moment, I saw the truth. The hallway wasn't empty. There were others. The children. Their faces, pale and twisted, their eyes wide open, staring at me from the shadows. They were standing along the walls, in the doorways, in the corners, silent. Watching. Waiting. Waiting for something that I didn't dare stop running. I couldn't. My legs were screaming in protest, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might burst. The ship felt like it was shifting beneath me, groaning and creaking as though it were alive, caught in the same terror that had gripped me. The lights flickered again, casting eerie, distorted shadows along the walls. Each time the light went out, I thought for sure I would be swallowed by the darkness, pulled into the suffocating grip of whatever was chasing me. But then I saw them. The children. At first, I thought they were just shadows, figments of my overactive, panic-stricken mind. But as I ran past, I could see their faces clearly. Eyes wide open, staring at me with hollow, emotionless gazes. Their skin was pale, almost sickly, and their clothes were tattered, as if they'd been here for a long time. They stood frozen in place, silent, watching me as I passed. I tried to scream, but my voice came out weak, strangled. The sound echoed off the walls, but the children didn't move. They didn't even flinch. The growl behind me grew louder. Closer. The shadow was moving, chasing me. But what terrified me more than anything was the stillness of the children. The way they just watched. They weren't scared. They weren't running. They didn't seem to care that I was about to be torn apart. I could hear them now, the whispers. Low, muffled, like the sound of a crowd murmuring in the distance. But these weren't voices of comfort. These were voices of the lost, of the forgotten, their words dripping with bitterness and regret. You shouldn't have come back. She's going to take you, too. You can't run forever. The voices wrapped around me, pressing in from every direction, like the walls themselves were speaking to me. The growl was right behind me now. The ship shook violently, the sound of something scraping along the metal floors filling the air. I turned a corner, my breath ragged, my legs shaking, and I stumbled into the engine room. For a moment, I thought I might be safe, but then I saw it. The same colored pencils. Scattered across the floor like they had been dropped by a child in the middle of playing. I stumbled back, my heart racing. The engine room was pitch dark, except for the dim light from a flickering bulb above me. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of oil and rust. But the worst part wasn't the smell or the darkness. It was the feeling of being watched. The pencils weren't the only thing on the floor. There was a drawing. A crude sketch, the kind you'd expect from a child, but there was something wrong with it. The lines were jagged, the figures distorted, as though they were struggling to be seen. And written on the back, in tiny, shaky handwriting, were the words. Why didn't you want to play with me? My stomach lurched. I stumbled backward, but I couldn't look away. I had seen this before. The same drawing. The same question. I backed up slowly, my eyes never leaving the paper, and that's when I heard it. A soft, high-pitched giggle. The sound that had haunted me all night. It wasn't distant. It was right behind me. I spun around, heart racing, but there was no one there. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. A small figure, a child, darting between the machinery. Her pale face peered out from behind the rusted pipes, her eyes glinting with something far darker than any child's innocence. Her mouth curled into a grin that made my blood run cold. You shouldn't have left me, she whispered, her voice sweet yet filled with an eerie malice. I just wanted to play. I couldn't take it anymore. The walls were closing in. The laughter, the whispers, the growls, all of it was coming from every direction. I felt suffocated, my head spinning, the air thick with something dark and suffocating. I turned and ran, my feet slamming against the metal floor, my body nearly giving out from exhaustion. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I had to get out. I had to escape. I burst out of the engine room, into the hallway, and ran straight into another figure. The man. The security guard. He was tall, but there was something off about him, something wrong. His eyes were hollow, like he wasn't really there, and his face was twisted into something grotesque, as if it had been stretched and pulled into a sickening grin. But it wasn't the man's face that made me stop dead in my tracks. It was the words he whispered, soft and slow, as if they were etched into his very soul. You're not leaving this ship. The words echoed in my head, too heavy, too terrifying to ignore. You're not leaving this ship. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My legs froze in place, as if the very air around me had turned to concrete, trapping me. The man, he was no longer just a security guard. His presence was something else, something far darker. His face contorted unnaturally, his eyes hollow and wide, like he wasn't human anymore. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. All I could hear was the pounding in my chest and the distant, sickening laughter of the girl. I looked around. The ship's walls seemed to shift, the corridors stretching out into infinite darkness. The air felt thick, like something heavy was pressing down on me, suffocating me. The man stood there, still, his eyes locked on mine, and I could hear his slow, deep breaths like the growl of some feral animal. Then, I heard it again. The scraping. This time, it was louder. Closer. Something was coming. Something was hunting. In that moment, I realized, this was it. There was no escaping. The ship wasn't just a ship. It was a prison, a vessel built to trap souls, to hold them for eternity, feeding on their fear. And I was its next victim. The man took a step forward, his foot dragging along the metal floor with a sickening screech. My pulse quickened. I felt the darkness around me tightening, the shadows pulling me in, suffocating me. The growl. The giggle. The whispers. They all grew louder, until they were deafening, surrounding me, suffusing my very being. I could feel the weight of it pressing on me, drowning me. And then I heard the child's voice once more, soft, almost sweet, but laced with something terrifying. You should have played with me. The man's smile widened, a grotesque mockery of a grin, as his hand reached out toward me, long and bony, like a skeletal claw. In a burst of pure panic, I turned and ran. I didn't know where I was going anymore. All I could think was escape. But no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't outrun the sounds, the shadows, the feeling that something was always behind me, always right there, just out of sight. Finally, I reached the deck. I slammed into the door with all my strength, the cold steel slamming against my shoulder, and I burst into the open air. The darkness behind me seemed to stretch endlessly, like the ship was pulling me back. I stumbled out onto the deck, gasping for breath, my legs shaking beneath me. I could feel my mind breaking, the terror consuming me. The air was damp, the ocean breeze carrying the scent of salt and decay. But it wasn't the fresh air that calmed me, it was the light. The soft, pale light of dawn creeping over the horizon, pushing the darkness away. But then, the scream came. It was a high-pitched, soul-crushing shriek that ripped through the air, so piercing it felt like it was cutting through my very soul. The sound came from inside the ship. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. I felt it, though. The presence. The thing inside, watching me, waiting for me to turn. The sun began to rise, the first rays of light spilling over the deck, and I saw it, the shadow. That dark figure from before, the one that had been chasing me. It stood at the edge of the ship, just outside the light, its shape barely visible in the gloom. It was huge, almost unnatural in size, towering over everything. And then, a fistful of colored pencils flew through the air toward me. The ship rumbled beneath me, and I could hear the laughter again, not the innocent giggle of a child, but something far more malicious, echoing from within the darkness of the ship. I froze. The voice of the girl rang out, but it was different this time. It wasn't sweet or playful. It was filled with rage, with sorrow. Why didn't you want to play with me? In that moment, I knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't live with this nightmare. I couldn't live with the thought of that ship, the thing inside, always waiting. Always there. I didn't even wait for my replacement, my coworker who would relieve me at dawn. I just left. The second I could, I walked away from that ship, from the nightmare that had consumed me. I never looked back. I never came close to it again. When I got the chance, I told the higher-ups what had happened. The ship, they said, had been abandoned for years. No one had dared work on it since, well, since the incident. But they didn't seem to care. They didn't want to know the truth. The ship was cursed, haunted by the souls of those lost within its walls. The girl, the laughter, the dark figure, it was all real. And there were others like it. More ships, more haunted places, more evil waiting in the shadows. The ship was eventually sold at auction. I saw it again, a few months ago, sitting there in the cold light of day, stripped of everything but its history. And the memories rushed back in a flood. That's why I'm sharing this with you now. Maybe it'll help. Maybe you'll believe me. Maybe you won't. But I'll never forget the terror of that night. I'll never forget the dark figure, the girl's laughter, or the way the ship felt alive. I still hear her sometimes. The girl. Her laughter. And I wonder, is it over? Or has she just moved on to another ship? Another soul to claim? If you ever find yourself on an old ship, working the night shift, beware. Because she's still out there. And she's still waiting to play.